Hi everyone, welcome to the first Patreon tutorial. I'm so excited to get going with these. I've got so many ideas of things to paint, but to start with, I wanted to keep it like fairly simple. Instead of doing a landscape first of all, I thought we could focus on just a singular nature object. So I'm going to go with the pine tree. You might have already seen this on Instagram. I did a bit of a Q&A around the process for this one as well, which you might have seen. Yeah, love doing this one, and I'm really enjoying painting trees at the moment. There's something really therapeutic about focusing on just one tree and sort of blanking out the rest of the background and not having to focus on the whole of the landscape. Yeah, so I thought I'd take you through this step by step. First of all though, I'm going to show you, I'm sat right now where I normally paint every day. So before I get started, I'm just going to show you the little setup I've got here, and then we'll go straight into materials. Okay, so this is going to be the piece that we are painting today. I'm using gouache. This whole piece is painted using gouache, and these are the materials that I'm going to use. If you are an advanced or intermediate artist or painter, then I'm sure you probably won't need me telling you what materials I'm using, but if for any chance this is the first time you've used gouache or it's the first time you're painting, it might be useful to know what I'm using. So to draw my outlines, I've used some Winsor & Newton pencils. These are just very basic small set here. I usually use the HB or the 2H for sketching out my lines. A rubber. My paint palette that I'm using is this little travel portable one. I can't remember what brand this is. I think I just got it from Jackson's Art. Really useful. It also comes with this little clear, I can get it out, clear palette, which is really useful as well. I'm just going to be sticking to this side today. Water jar. I'm using an old ice cream jar. We've also got a piece of kitchen roll or an old towel just to wipe your brushes on in between washing. The paper I'm using today is Strathmore. It's a mixed media pad. It's a gummed pad, which means that you can tear the sheets out here. It's a 300 GM paper. I love it. I've used this a lot actually for my tree series at the moment because it's thick, but it's not that sort of textured watercolour paper. It's very smooth. So that's the piece of paper that I'm going to be using today. Brushes I'm using, they're all Pro Art. Now the sizes have rubbed off some of them. I think, well, this one's a 6, size 6, size 5, and I'm pretty sure this one's a size 3. Let me double check. Yeah, size 3. We're going to be starting with the size 6 and then moving our way down. And then paint, I have a range of different colours here. We might be using all of them, we might not. We've got Winsor & Newton. Big tube of white. 2 different types of green. We've got the olive green and we've got the sap green, which I used in my paint with me the other day. We've got black, blue, this is the primary blue, Van Dyke brown, use a lot of that as you can tell. And we've also got the primary yellow. On top of that, I've got 2 Arteza gouaches here as well. We've got seaweed and we've got lime green. Sometimes I do just mix my own really dark green, and sometimes I use my own mix for a light green, but occasionally if I'm in a rush or if I'm just trying to get things done and don't want to spend too long mixing, I will use a pre-mixed lime green and just sort of add more white or yellow or blue, whatever, depending on what shade I want. So those are the colours we're going to be using. Again, if you don't have those exact tones, that's fine. As long as you've got your primary colours there, you should be able to mix these colours that we're using anyway. So I have gone ahead and just drawn my outline. Really basic pine tree shape here with the curving trunk. If you haven't drawn this yet, or you don't have your own one that you want to work from, feel free to just pause it here and sort of copy what I've done here. I'm going to open this. I like to have something to lean on. I'm just going to open this to lean on it. And yeah, let's start with the first layer. Ignore my sleeves in this. This is an old, really old jumper I've got. It's pilling and it's gone bumpy and horrible, but it's super comfy, so I love to paint in it. But it does look a bit ugly on camera. So the first thing I'm going to do is mix the base layers for the trunk and also the shadows. So I'm going to take my size 6 brush. I like to wet it down first. A little bit of seaweed. And I know that a lot of artists, or when I was at school anyway, tell you not to mix with black and instead to mix with brown. I've ignored that advice and I mix with black. I don't know whether it's right or wrong, to be honest, but I'm going to do it anyway. Feel free to mix with whatever darker shade you want, but I'm going to go with black. So the base layers of this are pretty dark, but they're not completely black. They're still very much green. So I'm going to mix a little bit of black in with that seaweed. So the consistency of the gouache that I like is not too thick and not too thin, which is probably not very useful for you, but a lot of gouache artists tend to describe it as a buttery texture. I wouldn't say it was necessarily buttery. I'd say it was like a thin icing. Does that make sense? Probably not. It sort of depends as well what layers you're doing. When I'm doing the highlight, I prefer to have a thicker paint consistency, but when I'm doing base layers like this, I prefer to have a slightly thinner, almost a bit like watercolour, but not quite consistency. So I'm just going to go straight in and just block out some of these highlights. You can be pretty rough with this, to be honest. I'm not overly cautious of my shadows. I also quite like for me to come back on later when I'm doing the next layers is just to fan out where I think these layers are gonna stop, so that you've got a bit of like leafy texture there. You can leave the ends quite messy, because actually what we're going to do is when we're bringing up the next layers, we're going to go over these and extend them out. So you don't have to, you know, feather any of the ends here, because we're going to be doing that with the other colours. I'm going to bring this down here. These bottom layers are very dark, so basically just going to block this whole bit out here. You might notice that as the base layers start to dry, if you've used quite a thin wash, then it will start to go a little bit patchy. I don't particularly like that look because I think it looks a little bit too much like watercolour, so I will often, which I think is what takes me so long when it comes to painting, I will often just go back over it a little bit where I think it looks a little bit too much like a wash. I'm just trying to look at my previous reference image and work out where these lines are, and I quite often do a lot of this sweeping motion without actually painting to work that out. When you're thinking of filling in the base layers and all the shadows, think about negative space. So I know that in my reference image there was a couple of areas where the light was shining through, so that is in the breaks between the boughs of the trees, but also where there is sort of patches where the boughs of the trees and the leaves are sort of parting and there's just the sort of bare branches showing. So I'm going to leave those patches where I know those are there. Just white, just leave them bare. Right, give the brush a clean. I tend to not use a separate jar for my washing brush and my watering down brush, so it does end up meaning that I need to change my water a lot more than usual. But it seems to work fine. So we're going to use a little bit of brown. This is the Van Dyke brown. This tube's a little bit dry, so it's a bit hard to squeeze on. I do. This tube of gouache for some reason tends to be really thick, so much thicker than the rest of my paints, so it needs a little bit more watering down than usual. I'm going to take the brown and a little bit of black. I'm going to start with this sort of mid brown here, and I'm going to just fill in the trunk. Again, we're going to be painting over most of this trunk, apart from this base, so it doesn't have to be super precise at the top there. But as we get down here, this is going to be the edges of our trunk, and they're not going to be covered up, so we want to try and keep this fairly neat. And I'm going to take that same brown and mix a darker shade of brown into it, so using more black. And this is going to be where we add shadow into the trunk of our tree. So I want to add a little bit of shadow to this edge. and into here. We want to drag it down here. Now I'm going to wait for this layer to dry, and I'm going to see if we need to fill in any of these patches once it's dry as well. Okay, it's looking a little drier now. Go back in and make sure that this is looking really clean down here. You can use a thinner paintbrush for this trunk if that's easier as well. Okay. While we're here, I'm going to go ahead and just fill in where I imagine the boughs of these trees are peeking through. So I reckon there's going to be one there, and sort of just shows through here, and I'm going to pop a little one here as well. Like that. Okay, using paintbrush number 5. I'm going to take my sap green. I'm going to pop a load of that on there, and then also a little bit of the olive green. I really like these two mixed together. Creates this really beautiful, natural but vibrant tone of green. With my paintbrush. And I'm going to mix these two together. Just going to test this colour out and see if it's the kind of tone I want. It might be a little bit too light, so I'm going to add a little bit of black in there. Add a bit of the seaweed in there. Right, I think the shadows are a little bit bluer. I'm going to add a bit of blue into it as well. There we go, that's better. Yeah, that's much better. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and just fill in where I think these slightly lighter tones are going to be. In this layer you can start by feathering some of these edges out. Again, they don't have to be perfect because we might be painting over some of them, but that's when you're really going to start seeing these like bottom layers starting to peek out at the edges. You'll notice as you start going over the trunk of the tree here that brown starts reactivating. It's not too bad, but if you keep going over it and over and over it with the same brush, it might start going a bit murky, so try not to sort of scrub your way over that if possible. There you go, so that's looking alright for the second layer. Now you can still see some of the base of the trunk of the tree there. The first time I painted this, I'm pretty sure I actually painted the trunk first and then painted those deep layers of green over it. Which meant that actually my trunk was already covered up by the time I did my second layer. So I'm just going to go in now with, again, that really dark green and just paint over the trunks on my tree there. We don't need those peeking through. It's also quite good at this stage, just pick up your shadows again and just neaten anything up that needs to be neatened up. Okay, that layer has sort of dried a little bit now, so I can work on top of it. I've also refreshed my water, so if you haven't done that, maybe do it now, because otherwise if you've got murky water and mix it in with your new colours, it might make it look a bit brown. So I'm going to take my same number 5 brush. This time I'm going to mix 2 different colours for the next lot of layers. So I'm going to take some white. I'm going to top up my blue. And I'm going to take a little bit more of this sap green, mix it into the colour that we used for that second layer. Might need a little bit more water, a little bit of white, and this takes me a little while to sort of get the colours where I want them to be. I know it's quite a bluey sage that I used, maybe similar to this, yeah, similar to this kind of colour. That's the first colour we're going to mix, and I'm going to just go straight in and start building out some sort of feather-like lines where I imagine these leaves would be. We'll bring it right up to the tips there. When it comes to this layer, we want to be able to show that there's layers of depth. So I wouldn't usually drag this layer all the way down here to hide those darker tones. I want to see some of those darker tones sort of creeping through. Some of them I'll bring down a little bit more, make it look a little bit more natural. At this point I think I'm going to start taking some of this colour and drawing some little leaves off the end there. I like to think of this layer as the first of my highlight layers. So again, I'm not being totally precise with it, but it gives me a really good indication of where I'm going to build loads of different colour on top of that. It's at this stage that you can sort of see how it's going to end up looking. So just keep sort of working those layers until it looks good to you. Sometimes that stage is kind of hard to work out. I'm going to bring this colour right up to the top. So I like the way that that's looking. Now I'm going to mix a slightly different colour based off of the same colour. So I'm going to take a little bit of that. I'm going to take a little bit of my lime green. And I want to mix something that's a little bit warmer, but is still light. So take a little bit more sap. Olive green in there. So I'm looking for a light yellowy green. And basically I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to work this colour into the highlights as well. Basically just want to build more depth. No tree only has 2 or 3 colours in it. Trees have so many different tones of green. And you want to try and replicate that as much as possible. At this stage you could really start fanning these lines out to look like little fan, sort of pine leaves. You'll notice as well, as you go over these darker layers, those bottom layers will reactivate and sort of blend in with these lighter tones. That looks it looks so natural and so lovely. And as they dry, they'll just sort of blend in with the layer below them. It's That's one thing I love about gouache, that the layers all seem to merge in with each other. Now after a while you will notice that some of these base layers are looking a little flat, and you want to sort of merge them in with these beautiful vibrant colours that you're building on top of them. There's no really set rule to do this. I just wet my brush and reactivated my sap green. Add a little bit of the seaweed in there. I don't like wasting any paint, so I just tend to go into the ones that have already dried out on my palette, and then just start sweeping colour into some of those areas, and then mixing them with some of these highlights so that you get some really interesting colours coming on. There are no real set rules to mixing colours, I feel. I just sort of tend to go with whatever I'm drawn to and whatever's left on my palette. Okay, so I think that's looking alright for my mid layers. At this stage it's a really good idea to sort of just pick up your painting and hold it afar, sort of at arm's reach, so you can start seeing how that is shaping. It's sort of hard to see how the shape is forming when you're just looking down at a piece of paper, which is why I think working on an easel is really good as well, so you can step away from it and have a look. Because I work on the sofa, tend to just prop it at the other side of the sofa and have a look at the shape. See how it's looking? I think the shape of that is looking pretty good. I think it's looking quite even. I think the colours are working quite well. So now I think we can go on to the last layer of highlights, which is those really beautiful, rich, buttery whites. So I'm going to go in again, the same colours I made with some white. I can add a little bit of blue in there. Take a bit of that sap green. Again, there's no set rule here for creating highlight colours. For this piece I tended to go with that nice even mix of a bluey green and a yellowy green. So let's test it out and see. You want to pick out the areas now that you really want the eye to be drawn to. So these are the real final highlights of detail here. I want my viewer's eyes to be drawn to the ends of the boughs of leaves. I want them to look really delicate, quite frothy. But I also love this sort of bit in the middle where all the boughs meet. Now I'm going to build that yellowy layer as well. So I'm going to take my lime green, a load of white, see how this looks. Again, there's not really any rule as to where you put your brush strokes, it's kind of just where you feel looks good. This style of painting is quite good because it's not super realistic, so you can find that you can have a little bit of a play with colour and a play with texture, and you don't have to worry about it looking super realistic. Really like how that's looking at the moment. I'm gonna go in again with a bit of sap green. I'm going to use my number 3 brush. Mix a bit of olive green, a bit of sap green, a little bit of blue, just to make another mid-tone. I'm just going to go in and put a little bit more detail into those mid-tones. That's looking pretty good. Let's make a deep green again, and then we can just start to flick out those greens here that I've left bare. And then for the final layer of leaves, I'm going to get white and just take a teeny weeny bit of those 2 light colours. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of areas which I really want the eyes to be drawn to. Okay, so looking for the leaves. Wash your brush. Now we're going to get your brown again. Pop it on the palette. We're going to work into the highlights of the trunk. Put a bit of detail into there. So you're going to take your number 3 brush. Grab some brown, a little bit of black, and add a tiny bit of white. You want to try and make a nice chestnutty brown. And just sweep your brush along the tree trunk there, where you imagine that the light would be hitting. Blend it in with a little bit of your darker brown. Rinse your brush. Add a little bit more white into that brown. And we're going to go into with a few more strokes and sort of a couple of dots to make them look like tree knots. Yeah, that'll do. And then finally, the little grasses underneath the tree. I'm going to grab what colour? A bit of the olive green mixed in with that mid-tone sap and olive green mix that you had. Quite a good idea to try the brush. Often I dip my paintbrush in too far and end up with droplets of water here which go over the paper and smudge stuff. Don't want that to happen. I'm just going to go in and just delicately paint these little bits of grass here. And then pop your brush into a little bit of black and then just run that colour on the edge of these little blades of grass. Just gives it a bit more depth. And then you want to get a little bit of blue, a bit of white, create a nice powdery blue. I wanted to put some little forget-me-nots underneath the tree. So dot your blues there. Create a little bit more depth and shadow by adding a little bit of the dark blue back into it. And then you can go a step further by adding a little bit of white here. Now we'll just wait for that to dry, and then we'll do the very finishing touches. While this is drying, I'm just going to hold this up a little bit closer so you can see all those layers. The good thing about waiting for layers to dry in between painting them is that you start seeing how the colours settle into each other. And I've already seen that there's a little bit more that I want to add here once it's dry. So now it's dry and I can take a look at it a little clearer. There are a few more changes I want to make. You can feel free to leave it as it is if you're really liking how yours is looking, but I'm just going to go in and make a few more amendments. I'm going to add that really deep green again. And I'm just going to pull my layers down a little bit here. One of the other things I want to do is grab my yellow and add a little bit of yellow in to my light green. I want to add some sort of details that look very much like branches of leaves. So I'm going to add this sort of trailing leaf texture in here with my yellow. I'm going to do the same up here. And add a little bit here. Add a little more white into there. The very last thing I'm going to do here is grab my white, just put a tiny bit on the end of my paintbrush and just highlight a couple of leaves. I'm going to put some here because I think there's something lacking in this area here. A little bit there. And just to even it out a little bit there. There we go. I'm going to hold this a little bit closer so you can see all the layers there. I'm going to add a little tiny artist signature to that as well. And then when it's fully dry, I'll go in with my rubber and just rub out all these little bits of pencil line that you can still see creeping out here. But there you go, finished. So there we have your final pine tree. I love it. I actually enjoyed painting it so much more the second time round because I actually knew what I was doing because I'd already done it before. So that was really enjoyable. Yeah, I hope it was useful and I hope it was helpful. I know that when I mix colours it's quite intuitive rather than here's a blue, here's a yellow, here's a green. But I think as long as you're working with the colours that you've already got pre-mixed on your palette, you're going to get really similar tones to what you're already working with, which is lovely. So if you just add a bit of white or a bit of brown to your current colours, you're going to get these colours that really marry in together anyway. If you've done it, let me know how yours turned out. I'd love to see it. Either post here or on Instagram or wherever. Yeah, I'd love to see your variations of a pine tree. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I will make another one of these very soon. If there's anything that you want to paint in the meantime, let me know. Bye.